Welcome to another edition of Maverick University. I'm your host, David Hallberg. Joining me today is evangelist and missionary Carlos Chacon. Brother Chacon is a graduate of Providence Baptist College and is sent out of Northwest Bible Baptist Church. And if you want to check out our previous conversation with Brother Chacon talking about soul winning and discipleship, you can check out our YouTube channel and also the audio-only podcast platforms where you can catch all of our different episodes. So thank you so much for joining us again, Brother Chacon.
Thank you for having me.
We're talking about your personal testimony, and we made application toward soul winning. We made application toward discipleship and how Christians can effectively be a soul winner and disciple people. And we basically ended your story with joining the Christian school at Northwest Bible Baptist Church, and you had expressed a calling to preach. And maybe at the time you didn't know exactly what that meant or what direction you were going to go. But eventually you were enrolled in a Bible Institute that we had, and then Providence Baptist College began in 1998, and you attended there as well. Can you talk a little bit about your college years, and maybe what were some things that guided you and directed you to the direction that God has you going today?
Yes. Since I was in the Christian school, I knew that was for preparation for ministry, and my pastor told me that. He said, you need to prepare for ministry. So right after that, we did Bible Institute, which was here also, just kind of on a smaller scale. Mm-hmm. So we did Bible Institute, and then we started, here at Providence Baptist College, and I was here for the first chapel, the first day, and so just a very exciting time. But I knew that this whole time, these years studying here, I was preparing for the ministry, and that God had a plan for my life to prepare me. And so I remember just going to work, working. I drove a forklift somewhere in a dock and would come to college in the daytime for classes, and I had moved out here, and so I lived out here in this area now in Elgin, and was just involved in the church and in the college.
Okay. And so during those years of college, did you graduate knowing that you wanted to go into some kind of evangelism or missions work?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I remember being in the offices with the academic dean. I remember making sure that my degree or diploma was evangelism major. Mm-hmm. I already knew. So I wanted to make sure I was very specific. I was targeting my calling. I knew that it was evangelism. Mm-hmm. And so from an early time, I began to prepare. My pastor sent me to travel with an evangelist, which was Dr. Joe Boyd. This was 1995 and 96. I traveled 2 summers with Dr. Joe Boyd, and we were in one of his meetings that was kind of a historic meeting, which was Salt Lake City, Utah, and it was a 6-week tent campaign and in Mormon country.
Wow. And so you traveled with him as a teenager. You were still in high school at the time then?
Yes, I was probably 17 and 18 years old, and I remember getting back from traveling with him, and we had the first tent revival. We call it the first tent revival with the teenagers, and along with some others who were involved. It was 1996. And we did a teen tent revival at the Elgin Sports Complex, and so those were those days.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. Mm-hmm. And so God used that opportunity to kind of direct you and lead you to what you're doing even today in evangelism and even some tent ministry type things. That's amazing.
Yes, we had another teen tent revival when I was in college, and and it was a little bit bigger because now we had more experience about how to develop and plan for it. Same place, Elgin Sports Complex. It was the year 2000. We had 700 people in the tent, and for 3 nights. And so all the young people, the college students, really were supportive of it. The church was behind it. We had raised funds and raised money all year long, and so invested that. Churches came out to be supportive, and so. When we had that meeting, God confirmed with me about my ministry and my calling, and it was just like Joe Boyd said, you don't have to train them, you just have to aim them. It was like, turn me loose, I want to hurry up and graduate, just let's get it done, and let me get to my ministry, and just completely, trying to hurry up and, get on deputation and raise my support and things like that.
I think the lesson to be learned here, and I'm just trying to draw some application from your story here, is that many young people, they're searching for God's will from their couch. And you found God's will serving God. You got busy doing something, and that's what kind of guided you and directed you.
There's no such thing as an anointed couch potato. We have to get out and work and serve and do something And I often say, even if you're doing something wrong, I mean, you might be doing something right, like soul winning, but it might not be in the right place or the right time. But don't worry, God will direct you into the right, to be soul winning in the right place. If you say, I don't know which bus route to be on, well, just get started, show up Saturday, and God will direct everything to where you'll be in His will. So absolutely, we have to work. God uses people that are busy, that are working, and so yes, sir.
You mentioned that revival, the tent revival at the Elgin Sports Complex in the year 2000. My family moved to Elgin in the year 2000. We had just joined Northwest Bible Baptist Church. And it was in that summer, I believe, and I had only been a part of the ministry like 4 weeks or 5 weeks probably when that event took place. And I remember going to it. And it was very exciting and
Wow.
very interesting. My first time, I think, under a tent for some kind of a service like that.
Yes, and we had a Billy Sunday theme, remembering Billy Sunday back to the Sawdust Trail because of a historic landmark here in the area. And so we had that theme, and we brought in sawdust. It was actually wood chips, but it was the closest thing that we can get. And so we went to lumber yards, and planned all of this. And so we had to get a permit, and we had a battle with the Park District over the permit. It just seemed they were putting it off and weren't cooperating. There was no reason, all the requirements were there. So we had a little battle with the Park District where we had to come and say, and I had to call them and show up and just tell them, look, you'll give me the permit. I need this permit. Or tomorrow I'm just going to bring all these teenagers here and all these college students, and I'm calling the news media and I'm calling the newspaper, and we'll just talk about this on the air. And they said, we'll give it to you in a few minutes.
That's
so
amazing.
they gave us the permit for the tent ministry, because that permit hindered our publicity.
Yeah.
You can't advertise until you have the permit. So once they gave us that, it was the green light to put the signs up everywhere, and just all the enthusiasm, and all the emotion of, wow, they got a tent meeting going on.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So you then fast forward, you graduated from college and things like that, and you continue on with this idea of tent ministry evangelism with Brother Boyd, and you end up getting a couple of tents, one here in the United States and one in Mexico. And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, my pastor was definitely very instrumental in doing all of this, even before sending me off with Dr. Joe Boyd and so forth and guiding me. So Pastor Gomez helped me get my first tent, and he bought me my first tent, and it was the tent that we had used at the sports complex. And so he helped me, get started with some basic equipment and things that I need, trailers and things, or vehicles and van, and just get it all together, just this rig on the road, and so God put it all together. And so Pastor Gomez helped me to set all that up, and I went into Mexico and just started in small villages, smaller churches. There was a kind of a big question about what's an evangelist, what does an evangelist do, and there was confusion about it. I really wasn't sure how to explain it to them, because it seemed to be a cultural thing in America where it's normal to have evangelists visit your church and preach a revival, but the Mexicans were not familiar with this.
Really? Okay.
They were not familiar with this, and so that was kind of a barrier, but it didn't matter. We still had good meetings, we still had, revivals. But my age, I was 24 years old, just being a young man, that was something like, people weren't sure about it. But then when they started seeing these tent meetings being filled with people, and we're talking about crowds of 200 and 300 people, and their churches being helped, 5-day revivals, 7-day revivals, I was just so busy, absolutely, for the first 6 years of my ministry, doing nothing but tent.
That's awesome. So I never even knew about that cultural difference where the idea of having an evangelist come in and preach a special meeting was kind of foreign to the people of Mexico. That's pretty interesting. Can you talk a little bit about the tent ministry and basically the why? Why a tent ministry? I mean, is there some advantage to having a tent meeting rather than having a meeting within a church building like typically happens?
I definitely think
it's definitely unusual.
Yes, a tent, is definitely something that comes from that American revivalism culture. So it's definitely cultural. It's definitely, comes from the historic roots of American revivalism. I guess in our type of religion where we talk about the old paths and so forth, it just seems to be part of our DNA, and so I took this tent ministry to Mexico, and God began to provide, all the things that we need, started having meetings. And it is a tent, just having a tent set up brings God consciousness to the community. Even if they're not members of the church, all these lost people driving by, they know there's something happening, something's going on, there's going to be some preaching that, a lot of older people will say, well, that reminds me, when I was young, I went to a tent meeting, and even if they're not churchgoers anymore, but it brings a lot of conviction just to see a tent set up and a revival announced. So that just from the very beginning, before the meeting ever starts, that is in effect. Now, in the Mexican culture, it does this. The Mexican people are Catholic, and they say, well, I cannot go to a Baptist church because that's a sin, But they say, well, this tent's not a church. Because to them, their mindset is church is a building, Yeah. We understand church is not a building, it's a people. But they think, well, I can go to the tent, it's okay. My priest shouldn't get mad about that, things like that.
I never even thought about that kind of advantage. I did think about that God consciousness because you're right about when I think old paths, old time religion, I think tabernacles, I think open air, I think tents, and that's kind of a part of our American culture. But yeah, for the Mexican people, that is a big issue, and it allows them a little caveat. Okay, well, I couldn't do that, but I could do this, and they can hear the gospel where otherwise they probably wouldn't have.
That's right.
Wow. What are some of the conditions that, as an evangelist, you're traveling around the country, maybe a pastor calls you, wants you in for a meeting, and maybe the tent meeting might be an option. What are some of the conditions that you try to have before you do some kind of a tent meeting and with a pastor?
I definitely like to talk to the pastors and just kind of interview them and talk to them and see about this. First, they have to have a property. Do you have a property or a park that you can obtain? And I often ask them, are there houses near there? Are there houses around there? Because a lot of people say, oh, we got a property, but maybe the houses are not near there. Maybe it could be industrial area where just factories, so it's got to be in the midst of the people. So I tell them there has to be a property big enough. It's got to be close to the houses where we're going to invite people to come to the tent meeting. And I often will say, do you have the men in your church that can come? Sometimes they say, well, they all work. I've had that happen where they say, all my men are working, So do you have the men who can come? Or we can set it up in the evening, if they get off work and come, and we've done that a lot. How many men? It's got to be 10 to 15 men, just to make it, easier for everyone and spend a couple, 3 or 4 hours to set up the tent. So tent setup is a lot of hard work, especially if you're down to a handful of people.
Okay, and so Pastor calls you, I want to have a tent meeting, and it's more practical conditions. It's how many people do I have to help me? Where's the location we can set this up and just get people in to that tent meeting?
Yes, I will also ask them some other things, like I will say, are other churches going to be involved? Are you going to invite churches? Will this work? Do you have a building where we could just have the revival meeting in the building? So sometimes I will ask them, is this just for your church? Do you want outreach, or is it just, like a conference in your church? And so we can adapt and make adjustments. A lot of meetings are in the churches, and sometimes some of the meetings could be open air. So we've had a lot of success with that. And it also matters if it's just one day, it could be like a big open air meeting. But if they say, no, we're going to be 5 days, we're celebrating a big revival that we do every year, then maybe it's better to have the tent if they're bringing other churches.
Do you have any interesting stories because obviously tents are unusual and they probably draw a crowd that wouldn't otherwise just go into a church building, like you said, and maybe it draws some interesting characters.
I do. We had a area-wide meeting. I call it area-wide because of the strategy. We had 12 cooperating churches in the city of Monterrey, in Mexico, and we had 700 people come out every night. These are smaller churches, but they were able to pack it out with visitors and so forth, 5 days. And so, but in that meeting, we had, I'm always careful to get the permit first. And so we got the permit. And the neighborhood authorities came and said, we don't want you to set up this tent here. And who are you? We don't know who you are. I said, here's the permit. They said, well, we don't care. It's just a piece of paper. We don't know who you are still, all this stuff. And I just said, just stay right here. I'll be right back. And I went straight to the police department. And I said, we got people harassing us. They happen to be authorities from the city or from the local neighborhood. And so the police happened to be a Christian police, And so he came, he got to the tent. Those people scattered like, cockroach when you turn on the lights, they just scattered. And But he was able to catch up to some of them and say, listen, what's going on here? Why are you harassing these young men, or telling them to leave and not set up the tent? And they said, well, we're the authorities in this neighborhood, and so forth. And they said they have a permit. It's signed by the county judge. You know, this meeting is a big meeting that's being planned here. And so you have to respect that, you know. And so the police, obviously, he parked there the whole week. He said, I'm going to park here the whole week, you know, in case somebody wants to come and just cause trouble. And so that's what happened during that time. And it reminds me when the Bible says, you know, your enemies shall flee 7 ways. You know, in Deuteronomy 28, your enemies shall flee from you, and I will bless you, and so forth. And so I've had experiences where on 2 occasions the tent fell.
Oh my goodness.
And the tent fell, I mean, just completely, not in the service, but in the daytime, or once it was at night, rainy night. And the reason was the land was slightly, you know, slanted. So that even if we set it up good, you know, a slightly slant, every pressure point counts, every rope, every stake, you know. And so it rains and it makes the tent like this. Pretty soon it came down. There we were the next morning, even with church ladies and stuff, and women and men and children, setting it all up again, you know, because we had a meeting at night and we got it set up and kept going. Had another meeting, the wind just completely, a strong windstorm came and just began to, you know, just untie the ropes and everything. And I just said, let's just finish untying it, let it go, you know, before it rips or tears. So a lot of things have happened. I've done a lot of driving back and forth through the Mexican border, and police will stop us, or immigration, you know, customs and so forth. What do you have here? What's this? And what are you doing? You know, all this stuff like that. And I've learned to talk my way through, you know, just get to the border. And I have the proper documents, you know, but sometimes they don't care, you know. And so we learn to just learn to talk to these authorities, these border custom authorities. Now I keep the tent. I have a tent in Mexico and I have a tent here, so I don't have to do that. But I did that a lot in my earlier years.
Well, that's a pretty awesome story. You know, just, you know, logistics. It's logistics. You're trying to figure some things out. Just as a parting shot here for our episode here, can you just talk a little bit about the need for evangelism, the need for you know, evangelists being in churches, and what have you seen God do through your ministry? Concerning
evangelism, there's a very important message that I have. It's 4 principles: sowing, planting, watering, and reaping. So when somebody says, you know, what's an evangelist? What should an evangelist do? And well, everybody has to work through their pastor, their local church. The Bible says, listen, you know, what the Spirit saith unto the churches. So one church might be focused on one area like sowing, you know, another church might be focused on planting, another church might want to have a ministry of watering, you know, and others of reaping. So there are some things, you know, we have a model for something. The Great Commission is a model. It doesn't matter where it is, what culture, it has to be obeyed. You know, there are a lot of things that are a model, but there are some things that are very unique and particular, and that there can be no copy. It's very unique, individual. And that's where we need to walk with God and have the discernment. So these 4 principles of evangelism, we have to, every young man has to decide, what ministry am I going to have, or what time frame am I in, what mission field am I in. There's some mission fields that your ministry is just going to be sowing. You know, all the soul winning, but not much fruit, not much results, but being faithful in a place where it's a sowing ministry. Some ministries will have, you know, it's a church planting ministry. They can start churches and they can plant churches, and so it's a planting ministry. And some, it's a watering ministry. Now, this comes from the Scriptures. You know, the Bible says in Corinthians, some plant, some water, God gives the increase. He that planteth, he that watereth are nothing, but it's the Lord that gives the increase. So, but it says, the Bible says they are one. That's a key thing. So we're all really, this kind of missionary, and that kind of missionary, and that kind of ministry, and this kind of ministry might be totally different. But the Bible says we're one. Even Jesus said in John 4, when he said, you know, he said, I've sent you to, you know, to labor or to reap the harvest where you have not labored. You know, he said to reap and he says that he that soweth and he that reapeth may rejoice together. So it's like saying we're all in this together. You know, there might be a missionary who has a small church and has a sowing ministry, has a planting ministry. He's sowing and planting. Now, my ministry is a reaping ministry, because I come in for a week or a few days and have this big evangelistic meeting that I try to do, or a big day, and it's just, you know, to get a bunch of people saved. So I agree, you know, some people will misjudge our ministry and say, well, what about discipleship? What about following up? And I'll say, that's what the church is there for. You know, that's your job. And so as much as I agree with discipleship and so forth, but an evangelist, God has given me a reaping ministry. So our job is to reap the harvest. Now, what if we did sowing, planting, watering, and we didn't do the reaping? That would be a waste, you know. To not do the reaping, it would be meaningless to do the planting, the sowing, and everything. So all the people who have done the sowing and the planting, the early pioneer missionaries, those who went to break the ground and, you know, carved it out, well, now it could be a time for a big citywide revival, you know, but they should be rejoicing in our efforts, and we are entering into their labors. So we have to see the broader picture of all of this.
Oh, that's great. I love that. So thank you so much, Brother Chacon, for joining us. If you want to check out our other conversations with Brother Chacon in the past or in the future even, check out our YouTube channel and our audio-only podcast platforms, and make sure you like and subscribe to this channel, and you'll get more updates from future episodes as well. Thanks for joining us.